Hello, this is Aline White Swan. Welcome to the mysterious domain. Now we have part 2 of the House of the Grail Keepers in the tuathadedanaantarot deck. And this is a very deep topic that I'm going to get into at the moment. The Grail suit is connected to elemental water. It's the cups in tarot. So it's the most feminine and watery of all the tarot suits, and it is the most evocative of Faery. Its emissary is the swan, who is the emblem of the other world, which is reached through mists, hills, lakes, ponds, wetland areas, caves, ancient burial sites, cairns, and mounds. Within these realms, the tuathadedaanan dwell in their opulent palaces maintained by their supernatural powers. Known for its majestic grace and gliding mystical beauty, the swan is associated with these gods and goddesses of the pre-Christian Celtic peoples. In 1990, I had a full-blown Kundalini awakening that gave me extremely high, some might say dangerously high, clairvoyant abilities. Soon after, I had a vision of a white swan flying through glowing celestial clouds. And a song filtered through into my mind. It was very eerie. And it went on for quite a long time. Now, my birth name is Arlene. Sounds kind of close to it, so I felt it was a call. My magical name, which can be found in Le Mort d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, is Aline, and Lady Aline is in one of the early parts of the book, spelled the way I spell it. The swan's name in Scots and Irish Gaelic is Éla. In Welsh, it's Alarc. In Breton, it's Alarc. And in Cornish, it's Alarg. So this is why my magical name is Aline White Swan, because I feel that that is my spiritual signature. It's like my soul signature. It's also very connected to the Holy Grail, which I've also been strongly connected to. The whole Arthurian mythos has always been kind of with me, and I do believe there's a tribe of us, because I run into other members periodically, and we have the same kind of, there's something about us. We're all kind of similar in some way. Swans abound in Celtic legends such as the Children of Lear, the mythological cycle of the tuathadedaanan. Now, the tuathadedaanan was said to have come to Ireland from the 4 cities in the north, and those 4 cities are Phineas, Gorius, Fallius, and Murius. And they can be entered through portals. They can be entered through the imagination. In fact, I'm going to do a video about that. The 11th century Book of Invasions tells how they arrived in dark clouds, and they were attributed with supernatural powers. And Lear of the tuathadedaanan was the father of the legendary Manannán Mac Lir, who anyone who knows Irish mythology will know of Manannán Mac Lir. He's kind of a Poseidon figure. Lear sired a daughter called Fionnuala, and he had 3 sons, Ed, Facra, and Con. When his wife died, Lear married her sister, Aoife. I don't know if I pronounced that right. That's what it looks like to me. Aoife grew jealous of the children's love for Lear and his attachment to them and their deceased mother. So she changed them into swans. Swans are also associated with death in the West, because which of course the Grail suit, the cup suit, is associated with the West and the waters and kind of going off into the sunset. It's that kind of passage into the other world that can happen at death. That old folk song of She Moved Through the Fair talks about the swans in the evening move over the lake, because the girl in the song is basically dying, and that's the symbolism of her passing. So she turned them into swans, and the spell was meant to last 900 years. It could only be lifted when they heard the bell of the new god ringing. When Lear found out what his new wife had done to his children, he banished her to become a demon of the air. And this is a little bit reminiscent of the Faery Melusine in France. But her husband didn't banish her, he discovered her, and she changed back to her original form of a dragon and flew out of the top of the castle and vanished. So these are all fairy things. These are, you could say they're kind of reptile things, I guess, but they're fairy things. And there's a lot of mysteries in this earth, about some of the peoples that have been on this earth. I mean, I don't believe that there have always just been humans. I firmly believe that there have been, that the earth is far older than what we think, and that we have had some different types of beings living here, and they still live here in dimensions very close to the third dimension. They're not in the third dimension, but they're very close. Well, after 900 years, the time of the tuathadedana had passed. And the children of Lear, in the shapes of swans, heard a church bell. The spell was lifted, and the children turned back into human form, but aged rapidly and died. So there's also that mysterious kind of thing when you're in fairy. It's like Rip Van Winkle, you're in fairy, you're in the other world, and it seems like it's passed very quickly. But when you leave it, you wake up, you find out you're 100 years old and you die. In case of the children of Lear, they were 900 years old. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Now, Lear appears in the tuathadedanaantarot as the King of Grails. And he is pulling up a net of salmon, and of course salmon are sacred because they swim back to the source, which is God, which is, humans would symbolize God, back to the source by going upriver. It shows you the task of the spiritual path. You have to swim against the current. And so the salmon is sacred for wisdom and for that kind of divine intention. The King of Grails is also the Fisher King. The Fisher King was wounded by the spear of Lu, who was king of the tuathadedana, and it was a magical spear, and the wounds that it caused would never heal. So the Fisher King couldn't heal, and he had the famous thigh wound, which is really a genital wound. Polite language for that. He was basically castrated. He was basically impotent. And all he could do was fish. He'd go out and fish. So he was called the Fisher King, and he was kept alive by the Holy Grail. So he is a Grail Keeper. Now the Holy Grail kept him alive, and it's a feminine, watery, in other words, emotional, otherworldly object. Because he was basically castrated, he had no queen, he had no way of procreating and bringing fertility to the land, which on a mystical level was the king's job. But he was fed by the Grail, which is an archetypal feminine force. And the only way he could be healed was when the preordained seeker found him and asked him, who does the Grail serve? And nobody... I don't know if anyone's ever really figured out the answer to that, the definitive answer. Some people say, oh, it's to serve the king, but others might say it's to serve humanity. If you believe that it's a vessel of Christ's blood, then you would say it's to serve humanity and bring salvation. But these stories weave together tuathadedana, the other world, Christianity, the Holy Grail, the swans. They're all woven into one big tapestry. One of the legends of King Arthur that involves the swan is in the story of Percival. Now, Percival was raised in the forest by his mother. His father was absent, probably killed in a battle or something. And Percival was wandering in the forest near Camelot. And he saw a swan, and he shot it with his bow and arrow. Now, he was brought before the knights. There were a lot of rules in the Middle Ages. Against poaching on the king's land, of course. But this was a particularly egregious thing for Percival to do, because King Arthur protected the woods and protected the animals and the wildlife on the land. And the knights basically told him all life is sacred, and Percival, feeling extremely mortified by this, decided to join the quest for the Holy Grail, which was meant to bring healing to the aging King Arthur and heal the wasteland that Camelot had become, because it had been, it had turned away from Christianity to black magic, and this was partly due to the influence of Morgan Le Fay and Mordred, who was King Arthur's son by his sister Morgause. And Mordred was, a between kind of person in that respect. He was part of the old race, that Faery race, and he was partly human, King Arthur. But he also felt he had a claim to the throne. Morgan Le Fay strongly felt he had a claim to the throne, because they were going to bring the kingdom back to the old ways. Tales about Percival were popular in the medieval world. He was a fool. And he's the fool in the tuathadedanaantarot deck. But he was made wise by his adventures, and he learned to understand life and the forces of life. And he became a culture hero for the people of the day, but all of them did. The Arthurian legends were all extremely popular in the way like Star Trek or something is popular now. And people wanted to be these characters, and they would, dress up as these characters in balls and things like that. And he helped to return the kingdom of Camelot back to life, back to light. In other words, they healed the wasteland. There's a wonderful saying about swans as well, that swans, for thousands of years, swans have been a symbol of love. Of course, they mate for life. And they kind of make those heart-shaped things, with their necks and their heads. So for thousands of years, swans have been considered a symbol of life. And when Percival shoots the swan, he doesn't just kill one bird, but he kills love. And I think that's kind of a deep thought in relation to the swan and the other world and the Grail. And it also connects to the chivalric tradition, which was begun and developed by Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married to Henry II, which had brought England and France together under one rulership. And she had created the courts of love. And I can't believe what I'm going to say is controversial at all, but chivalry has nothing to do with misogyny or patriarchy or toxic masculinity or anything like that. Everything that we hear about this now has been watered down so bad to kind of cliches and assumptions and propaganda. Because the chivalric tradition was actually the opposite of that. I mean, Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most powerful women in Europe. And Marie de France, in her court, also wrote the Arthurian legends. They told them, they developed them. Taking Henry II's childhood memories of the Arthurian legends from Britain, bringing them to France, and these ladies turned them into the famous romances that we know today. It's not an accident that Thomas Malory's title of his Arthurian canon basically is called Les Morts d'Arthur. That's in French. So, I mean, in the Middle Ages, men were like 10 times as strong and full of testosterone as men are today. I mean, they were warriors. They were hardcore, strong warriors. And what's remarkable too about these men, if you've ever been to a museum where they show armor, they weren't very big. They were small people, but they could lift this broadsword that I couldn't even lift. Well, of course, I'm kind of wimpy, but you know. But if you ever picked up one of those old broadswords, and I've had occasion to do that, they're heavy, and these guys were tough. Eleanor of Aquitaine's son was Richard the Lionheart. And Richard cut a swath through the Holy Land and everything else. I mean, he was a famous knight. So, of course, then she had John, and she had, you know, he was kind of a scoundrel up there in England, right? King John. And Henry II was actually the last French Christian king of Jerusalem, and they're from a long line of French kings of Jerusalem, beginning with King Baldwin, who I believe was a leper or something. So they'd had this idea of the Crusades. The French monarchy had been ruling in Jerusalem for many generations. So chivalry was designed to civilize these men. It was no longer acceptable with the queen, Eleanor, that they should rape and pillage all over the place, you know? And this is the root of the Grail quest. Like when the knights go on the Grail quest, they're seeking the divine feminine. The Holy Grail is the divine feminine. It may be the cup with Jesus' blood, but the cup with Jesus' blood means that it's the Virgin Mary, basically, because it's a womb. It's a womb symbol, and the blood in the womb is Christ's blood. This is a symbol of the Virgin Mary. These knights were tasked, and you can see it all through the Arthurian legend and the Grail legend, with revering women and seeing the woman as a goddess, seeing the woman as his, in many ways spiritually, his superior, and protecting women instead of raping women. Can I say that word on YouTube? Instead of assaulting women, they were meant to protect the women. And the idea of courtly love was also developed with Marie de France in Eleanor's court. And the idea of courtly love was that these men would worship an unattainable woman, and the woman was, you know, Eleanor. It was the queen, like Guinevere. It was the queen. It was or one of the ladies that was married. But so the idea was that the knight would learn that love was more important than lust. He could never consummate this relationship, but he had to learn to have love in his heart. And of course, this is the beginnings of romantic love. Love in his heart. About heart, and in French, the word for heart is cœur, and it's the root word of courage. So the idea that the knights have courage, and they also have heart, and they have love. And this is where the idea of the perfect knight, and the one who achieves the Grail is the one who, like Galahad. Well, of course, Galahad was very young, but it was the idea that they were chaste, but they were lovers. And this is where Western men had learned to sublimate their sexual desires in order to achieve something divine. I guess it's called agape. Agape love. Love for God and creation and humanity and everything. And this is how men were civilized. So Christian men learned how to control their sexual desires in service to the feminine, to the goddess, and play a protective role. This is how this happened. There was no more raping and pillaging. The Ten Commandments forbade adultery. So the Christianizing of Europe came as much through chivalry as it did through ecclesiastical power. And it's one of the reasons Western civilization flourished the way it did. Because these powerful men with these high drives and all this testosterone built the great cathedrals, not for self-aggrandizement, but for the glory of God. They had attained this worship, this honor, this love of the divine, and created amazing artworks and beautiful buildings and so many things. The whole troubadour tradition of music came out of this. Built societies of great trust and the protection of women and children. So in this Grail suit in the tuathadedanaantarot, we can see how this plays out, this chivalric tradition plays out. In the Two of Grails, we have Tristan and Isolde. Now, Tristan and Isolde is one of the great romances of all literature. It's up there with Romeo and Juliet, and it's far more powerful than Lancelot and Guinevere's story. It's older than that as well. The Cliff Notes version, Tristan is a knight in service to King Mark of Cornwall, and he, like in the relationship with Arthur and Lancelot, is also a friend. He is King Mark's favorite knight, best friend. Tristan goes to Ireland to slay a monster who wants to eat virgins, called the Morholt. And he does slay the monster, but he slays the monster, but he's rescued by Isolde, who famously has beautiful, shining golden hair. Once he's better, he goes back to Cornwall, and there's a golden hair on his jacket or his sleeve. And King Mark, he's looking for a queen, and he sees this beautiful golden hair. He said, "Oh, I'd love to see the woman who this hair belongs to." So he sends Tristan back to Ireland to fetch this woman who he decided he's going to marry. It didn't take much in them old days, I guess. So Tristan goes to get Isolde, and Isolde's lady in waiting creates a love potion that's designed for Isolde to drink with King Mark so they will fall in love with each other. But on the boat going back to Cornwall, Tristan thinks it's a bottle of wine, and he puts some in both their goblets, him and Isolde. They drink the love potion, and they fall madly in love with each other. Crazy passion, like completely obsessed with each other. And when they get back to Cornwall, Isolde does marry King Mark, but they can't stay away from each other. They just cannot stop this thing. He's not doing courtly love. You know, he's supposed to worship her from afar, but he can't. And King Mark is aware that there's something powerful going on between them, and is strangely tolerant of the whole thing, considering the times. And of course, the whole thing ends in tragedy. But what I find interesting about it is, was it really the love potion? Because, of course, they both die at the end, spoiler alert. But they're buried side by side. And then a rose grows out of both their graves and intertwines above, as if their souls, their love, is gone into the next life. So in a way, they were soulmates. Anyway, it's a very beautiful and powerful story. I suggest you read it. It's not that long. Well, I guess it's kind of long for what it is, but it's worth it. So this card shows them drinking the love potion. Now again, the grails have to do with the waters, the sacred wells. And the Three of Grails shows the priestesses of the sacred wells. All waters are portals to Faery. And the wells are also portals to Faery. And these waters, these priestesses maintain these waters for travelers who needed to stay somewhere, because people used to walk on foot for very long distances or horseback or whatever. And they would provide them with shelter and water from these wells, which were healing, had healing powers. And the priestesses are wearing a kind of version of the Holy Grail. It's a moon arc. Of course, the moon has to do with the feminine and with the cycles of the moon and fertility and eroticism and procreation and the generative power of the feminine. And so these crowns are like the moon, but they're a little kind of like Isis in a way too. So they represent the goddess. And these priestesses are here in a good spot. They're tending to the wells, and they have their golden cups, which are like grails, in order to share the waters with the traveler. Now in the Four of Grails, we are still with these goddess figures. In many of the stories of the Arthurian knights, they're out there questing or whatever, and one will get wounded by a boar. And it's always a thigh wound, right? So the boar, the pig, that pig is another symbol of the goddess. I'm not sure the boar is the male, and I don't know what they call the boarette or whatever. Anyway, the boaress. Anyway, where's a tusk? Anyway, but the pig is a very strong goddess symbol. In fact, Carriage Wen appears as a sow. That's what it is. But he is attacked by the boar and has a thigh wound, and he's sitting under the tree, and his cups are falling through the roots of the tree into the other world, and the fairy queen comes along and offers him a grail, a cup. And that is meant to take away all his pain, when really what it is, it takes away his pain because she draws him and takes him into the other world. The Celts were kind of interesting about death. They didn't believe in death, and they were headhunters as well, which shows in kind of the stories of Bran the Blessed and all of these with the oracular heads and stuff. So they were great warriors because they really weren't attached to the body. There was the other world, and this was their passage to the other world. Now in the Five of Grails, we have the Swan Knight Lohengrin. And Lohengrin marries this woman, and he tells her, never ask me my name, because he's an otherworldly knight. He's a swan knight. So finally, after 5 kids and 10 years of marriage, one day she slips up and she says, what is your name anyway? And he takes off. He leaves. And here he is, the swan flying away. He goes back to the other world. And that's disappointing. That's 5 of Cups. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. There's so much material in all of these cards. There's so much. So I'll be doing part 3 next. But, if you like these, please share them and subscribe to my channel and like the video, because that helps build the channel. And I mean, there's so much deeper, so many deep places I can go. You talk about rabbit holes. The Arthurian stuff, the tuathadedanaantarot, the Celtic, all this has like a rabbit warren underneath. So if you're interested in these things, I'll keep doing them. Anyway, so yeah, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye. you.